I was asked to talk a little bit about Helen, and it's been a long, long life, and we have been friends for all the years through our life. It's hard sometimes for me to believe that we have been friends for so many years without any arguments, without any bad feelings, without disliking each other. As so many brothers and sisters I have found do have problems with each other. I remember, my memories go back to the time when they brought Helen home from the hospital. I am 5.5 years older than she. And my mother promised me a little sister that I could play with, and I was extremely disappointed when I saw that little tiny thing in the middle of the great big bed. But time went on, and I felt always very responsible for her. I felt that I needed to be protective of her. And from the time she was little, I think I was wise enough at that age to be aware that Helen would not take any bossing around or anyone telling her what to do. She was a very independent little girl. She was rebellious, and she was very definite in what she wanted and didn't want. So that some years later, for instance, when I must have been maybe 10 and maybe she was then 5, we had little chores to do. And my chore was to dust the living room and dining room furniture once a week, and Helen to help me. And at one time my mother came to me and said, "Dorothy, I have trouble with Helen. I tell her to do things and she refuses. She says she won't." And she says, "I want you to tell her what I want, because she always listens to what you say." And that was true. She really did, and I was always very careful never to tell her, you must do this or you must do that. And we grew up together, being good friends, but each of us had our own life. As she got old enough, she had her own friends, and I had my set of friends, and the two sets never mingled. There was something I wanted to tell about. From the time that Helen was a little girl, she always wanted to be a teacher. I think she was just born a teacher. And an amusing incident is about, is the time when she was about 7. And next door to us lived a little boy, Sammy. Sammy was about 4. And Sammy would always come over to our back door in the spring and summer, and we'd sit out on the porch. And my mother would always have a few raisins or a few nuts for Sammy. Well, whenever Sammy appeared, Helen would grab him, make him sit down, and say, "Listen, I'm going to read a story to you." Sammy sometimes wanted to listen and sometimes didn't, and he would squirm and try to get away, but Helen hung on to him and said, "No, you've got to sit here and listen to the story." So that was the time when I realized right at the beginning, this is what she wanted to do above all else. And of course, when she graduated high school, went to Teachers College, and after Teachers College started teaching. And she taught for over 30-some years. She always loved it, and she always was a wonderful teacher. Helen taught for so many years, and there came a time when she was requested to help organize and build a new school that was a preschool and was opening up in a very, very poor black neighborhood in Chicago. And she started out by helping to survey the land around there to find where there would be a good location for the school. And then she went around to the homes, in spite of the fact that this was considered a black neighborhood, a dangerous neighborhood for a white person to be roaming around in. She went into the various buildings talking to mothers to bring their children to the new school, preschool. Would start with 3-year-olds. And so the school started, and later on, eventually, she became the assistant principal for a while of that school. So this was a very important part of her life, and she was a very effective, she was a very strong woman. She was strong in the union. She worked with them. But now that I'm talking about it, an incident occurs to me. When I was in my early 40s, I decided that I would go back to college. I had not been to college as a youngster, and my youngest child was in kindergarten, so I thought now I had the right to leave the home and go back to school. And I became a teacher too. At that time, in part of my teaching routine was to visit and observe another teacher. So I went to Helen's classroom. At that time in Helen's classroom, Helen had a big duck walking around the room. One of her friends was in the poultry business, had given her a baby duck for Easter, and the children, her daughters, were just thrilled about it. They raised the little duck, I think, in the basement, and then she took them to school with her. She thought that would be a good learning experience for the children. And it was a most fascinating experience for me to see the duck waddling around with the children, and they would be holding him and playing with him. And then she said, "Children, I want you to all sit down because it's time for a story." And all the children sat down around her on the floor, and the duck waddled over with the children and sat down and sat there the whole time, just like all the other children listened. And when the children got up, he got up. I think he began to think that he was one of them. But another aspect of the story is that Helen had a sponge which was like glued to her hand, because everywhere that duck went, she followed the duck and was constantly cleaning up poop over the whole kindergarten. So that was a wonderful experience. Many years went by, and Helen and I were always friendly through the years, and our children were always very close with each other. But at most of the years, Helen lived about 9000 south in Chicago, and I lived about 8600 north in Chicago. And I did not drive or have a car, so if I wanted to go visit her myself with the kids, it would take about 2 hours on the L here. But we still managed to be together, and we would go out together, meet, and do things. Many years later, Helen decided, when Helen remarried and married Lester, they decided to find an apartment on the north side, and then moved into an apartment directly across the street from where I lived. And that was really wonderful for both of us. We lived across the street from each other, could see each other very frequently, maybe daily, and spend our social life together. When finally she began to fail, and things were getting so that Lester thought it was a good idea, they moved into this self-help home. And they lived here for about half a year or so, when I decided it was too lonely for me all alone in my big apartment, and I moved into the self-help home also. Anyway, the end now has come, where both of us became old ladies, and I guess in some ways grateful that we lived this long. And now the end has come for Helen, and I do think about her daily.